And a few years ago, we were in a meeting with Candy, and Candy told us a story, a true story, about her childhood playmate that she was raised with. His name is Bobby. Bobby grew up in the home, I think, of an AG pastor. I think his daddy was a pastor. Bobby got into drugs, got in the wrong gang, and when Bobby was an older teenager, early 20s, Bobby was so consumed by drugs that one day he just disappeared. I mean, he just, like he fell into a hole somewhere, just disappeared. And for 2 solid years, his mother and daddy did not hear one word from him. They didn't know if he was dead or alive. I got a son and a daughter. I can't imagine that my son Greg just dropping out of sight for 2 years. Anyway. So his dad, after 2 years, was in Arkansas, passing in Arkansas, driving around the motorway one day, and he said he felt like he was just choking with grief and anger and everything else. So he stopped his car off the motorway. He got out on, we call it the median, you would call it between the two thing. And he's got on a 3-piece coat and tie and all. And cars is passing now this way. So he walks out into the middle of the motorway on the grass. He turns to the north and he shouts to the top of his voice, "Bobby, come home!" That'll kind of interfere with traffic. What's this guy doing out in the middle of the grass shouting something? And so he turns to the south and he shouts to the top of his voice, "Bobby, come home." East, west, "Bobby, come home." And 2 days later, there was a knock on his front door. He went to the door, opened it up, and there stood Bobby. Now, he looked terrible, but the boy was home. Got him in, basically, "Bobby, tell me your story, where you been, what's been going on to you." And this is what Bobby said. He said, "Dad, 2 days ago, I was sitting on the front porch of an old shack in the Arizona desert, 4 states over, about 1,000, 1,500 miles over is where it was." He said, "I was sitting on the front porch of an old shack on the edge of the Arizona desert, stoned out of my mind. I was just floating around." He says, and all of a sudden, I looked out across the desert, and I saw like a wind deal kind of start. And I looked, because wind don't blow in that part of the desert, Dad. And so I got up and I thought I was hallucinating. So I got up, and by the time I got up out of my old rocking chair, he said, I knew it was real. The wind started blowing across the porch. And he said, "Dad, it got so strong, I had to hold on to the post to keep it from blowing me on the other side. And Dad, I could swear that I heard your voice in the wind saying, 'Bobby, come home.' And Dad, I got here as quick as I could." Now, if that stretches your theology, as it did mine, King James Version mistranslates Psalm 104:4, uses the word angel, and the word angel is not even in the Hebrew. I checked it. It's wind. So this is the way the modern translations and the Hebrew text translates it. And God uses the winds as his messengers. "Bobby, come home." Now listen, don't make a fool out of yourself and go out and just shout to the wind. What's this? I'll tell you 3 other stories that happened in New Zealand in the last year and a half. You mix your word with faith. It's like a railroad track. 2 tracks. The train can't run on one. Runs on 2 tracks. There is the word, and then there's faith. What I say is going to come to pass. "Be it to you according to your faith," Jesus said. Well, we told that story about Bobby a few weeks before the seminar in Wellington, New Zealand, January a year ago. Dr. Selwyn had told the Bobby story to 2 or 3 groups of people. And Pambi Nubi is an engineer from Zimbabwe that has migrated to Wellington and lives in Lower Hutt. And Pambi heard Dr. Selwyn tell the story of Bobby. The Saturday afternoon, Lynn and I were in Lower Hutt to do the seminar. Pandy, he was going to come to the seminar. He had remembered the Bobby story. And he has 4 boys, and his oldest son lives in London, England. He had not seen his son in 8 years, had not heard from his son in over 2 years, though he repeatedly contacted his son, and his son refused to contact him back. The morning of our seminar, remembering Bobby, remembering Mike in Augusta, calling his mom back. He goes out and he turns to the north and he said, exact words, I got them in my briefcase, "Son, come back to God and come back to me." He turns to the south and shouts the same thing, "Come back to God and come back." East and west. Comes to our seminar. While Linda Reddick is teaching her part Saturday afternoon, Pandy gets a text message on his phone during our seminar from his son in London. And this is what the text message said in the middle of our seminar. "Hey, old man." I like that. "Hey, old man. Now, you've been wondering why I hadn't contacted you. Dad, I can't explain it all by text message. Dad, I'll tell you later, but Dad, I just want you to know, I love you, I respect you, and now it's time for us to get reconnected." Okay, that was a year and a half ago. I saw Pandy 2 weeks ago in another seminar, and I asked him, "Pandy, it's been a year and a half, how is it?" He said, "My son and I, we typed. He's still in London, but we're communicating now." In that same seminar in Lower Hutt, January a year ago, there was a mother, we think maybe single mother, that has an 11-year-old son, Luke. 2 days after she left the seminar, mid-January, somebody stole Luke's bike. We're trying to run her down. We think it was a new bike, and probably his dad was not in the home, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Why it might have been that. So she goes home to the seminar 2 days later, bike's gone, and she said it devastated Luke. New bike just gone. So she remembers Bobby, she remembered the stories, and she said, if it weren't for Mike's mom, if it weren't for, and she said, I better work for bikes. So she said to her 11-year-old boy, "Hey, son, come out here and we're going to call your bike home. He said, "Mother, this religious stuff has just made you crazy." "No." She said, "Listen, son, you don't have to participate in it." She said, "I'm going to call your bike back." Now see there? Words and faith. So she turns and she says, "Bike," exact her word, "Bike, come back to us. Come back home." North, east, south, west. Sometime early afternoon, early evening, I think she did that. And before bedtime that night, her phone rang, and a sergeant or an officer at the local precinct in Lower Hutt, New Zealand, where she had filed a missing bike report, the officer called her and said, "You will not believe what just happened. One of our officers was coming in the front door and noticed Luke's bike propped up against the front door. Please come and get your boy's bike before bedtime." And he uses the winds as his messengers.